Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into, well, what might be the most uncomfortable necessity facing global climate policy. We're talking about aggressive climate interventions. So we're moving beyond just mitigation and exploring these huge technologies designed to either, suck carbon out of the atmosphere or literally turn down the planet's thermostat.
And we really have to. The sources we're looking at today make it painfully clear that the traditional, slower methods of cutting emissions just aren't working fast enough.
Not even close.
No. And given the current pace, which the study authors call phlegmatic, which I think is a great word for it, these aggressive intervention technologies, they have to be on the table, seriously considered.
That urgency is defined by a very specific and frankly a very frightening number detailed in the material. The carbon budget we have to keep global warming within that 1.5 degrees Celsius target, it's projected to be effectively exhausted as of 2025.
As in right now.
Right now. Analytically speaking, we are past the point of no return without some kind of massive large-scale change.
And the economic cost of doing nothing. It just makes this whole situation unignorable. If we fail to limit the warming, the projections are just staggering.
Give us the headline number.
Every single 1 degree Celsius increase in global temperature is now estimated to result in a catastrophic 12% decline in global GDP.
12%.
12%. That means the macroeconomic damages are something like 6 times greater than what previous models were telling us.
That just puts the stakes into a genuinely terrifying perspective. I mean, it's not just about environmental damage anymore. It's about global financial stability. It demands action that is, immediate and coordinated.
But, and this is the whole point of our deep dive today, aggressive action requires public support. It needs a social license to operate.
And that's where our source material comes in.
Exactly. Our mission today is built around this massive piece of research, a mixed method study looking at 5 key European nations: Austria, Germany, Italy, Norway, and the UK.
So this is a big one.
It's huge. Over 5,000 survey participants, plus 10 focus groups. It was all designed to understand exactly what the European public knows, what they think, and, crucially, what they fear about these drastic climate measures.
So that's what we're going to do. We're going to unpack this source material to get at the public's concerns around governance, the tech itself, and that critical element of trust. And we're going to highlight where these perceptions diverge, sometimes dramatically, across Europe, which shows you exactly why any kind of one-size-fits-all policy is it's guaranteed to fail. Okay, let's start with the basics, because these solutions often get lumped together, but they are fundamentally different things. We're looking at 2 main baskets of intervention. First, there's carbon dioxide removal, or CDR.
Right. CDR is all about the pollution itself actively pulling co-euro out of the atmosphere and then locking it away somewhere. This includes the stuff we're all familiar with, the ecosystem-based solutions like planting forests, managing soil. But it also includes these novel engineered solutions.
And these engineered solutions are where things get really complicated, not just technically, but socially. So can you give us a quick breakdown? What do these acronyms actually mean?
Sure. So we're talking about direct air capture with carbon storage, or DACCS.
It's a giant vacuum cleaner.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, like a massive industrial vacuum sucking co-euros right out of the ambient air.
Yeah.
Then you have enhanced rock weathering, ERW, which is basically crushing up specific types of rocks and spreading them out to speed up a natural chemical reaction that absorbs carbon.
Okay, and the last one?
And finally, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, or BECCS. That's where you grow biomass, like trees or crops, burn it for energy, and then you capture the CO as it's released and store it underground.
Right, so that's basket 1. Then we have the second basket, solar radiation management, or SRM. Now, unlike CDR, SRM doesn't remove any carbon. It's designed purely to treat the symptom the planet's fever by reflecting sunlight away from Earth. Examples here would be stratospheric aerosol injection or marine cloud brightening.
And when the researchers asked the public about these, the starkest finding was just this massive contrast in familiarity.
I can imagine.
Unsurprisingly, people across all 5 countries were most familiar with the ecosystem-based stuff, like planting trees. It feels tangible, it feels safe.
But when you get to the engineered solutions, and especially SRM, public knowledge it falls off a cliff. Over 2/3 of UK respondents, for example, said they had never even heard of SRM. The lack of familiarity is it's huge.
And the qualitative data, the focus groups, they paint such a vivid picture of this gap. You had participants in both Italy and the UK describing SRM interventions, reflecting sunlight with aerosols or brightening clouds as science fiction.
Things you'd see in a movie.
Exactly. The sheer scale of the technology just distances it from being a credible option in their minds. It doesn't feel real.
On the CDR side, that preference for natural methods is just crystal clear. In the UK, participants were really optimistic about using their coastline for, like, seagrass to absorb kuro. It fits with that idea of a natural restorative process.
But even the engineered CDR solutions, which are designed to remove pollution, they face these immediate hurdles. A lot of skepticism about where you put them, the safety of storing the carbon, the risk of leakage. And this is where past national experiences really start to color how people see things now.
And this is where the German experience becomes so relevant, right?
Absolutely. German participants drew these very clear, very negative lines between storing KOs deep underground for DCCS or BCCS and their past controversies over things like fracking and nuclear waste storage.
So it immediately triggers those same fears.
Instantly. Concerns about long-term safety, local environmental impact, all of that comes rushing back. And that localized fear connects directly to one of the biggest philosophical concerns of all, mitigation deterrence.
The moral hazard argument.
Exactly. Austrian and German respondents were really vocal about this. They worried that promising SRM or these big new engineered CDR solutions would just kill the motivation for policymakers and industry to do the hard work of cutting emissions today.
That seems like a core conflict. I mean, we need the cleanup technology, but we're afraid the cleanup tech will just become an excuse to keep making a mess. Does the source material suggest any way around that?
It all comes down to governance and regulation, which we'll get into more detail on later.
Yeah.
But basically, if the tech is seen as being run by private companies for profit, that fear is really high. If it's seen as a last resort safety net governed by independent science, the fear lessens a bit, but it doesn't just disappear.
I thought the breakdown around enhanced rock weathering, the ERW, was incredibly illustrative of how framing just completely dictates whether people accept something.
Oh, it's a perfect example.
Yeah.
You have urban Italian participants in the focus groups worrying that ERW requires more and more stones to be crushed. They see it as a resource problem.
They're picturing quarries and industrial machinery.
Right. But then you have rural Italian participants looking at the exact same process, and they described ERW as a natural restoration of nature.
The difference is purely semantic, but it completely changes public acceptance.
Which is the perfect transition to the national attitude themes. It proves that these policies aren't accepted based on the technology alone, but on these fundamental worldviews. National attitudes just vary dramatically based on these deeply rooted themes: environmental identity, local experience, and this cultural aversion to tampering with nature.
Let's focus on that aversion to meddling. The Austrian respondents expressed the strongest agreement that humans should just leave nature alone. What's the historical context for that?
Well, the researchers link this to what they call Austria's technopolitical identity. They just have a long history of environmental caution. Think about past national bans on really controversial tech, like GMOs and nuclear power. For Austrians, this deep skepticism means any new intervention is viewed with the absolute highest level of caution.
Now, you contrast that with Norway, which seems to be on the complete opposite side of the spectrum.
Completely. Norway scored the lowest of all 5 countries on measures of environmental identity. So they identify least with that worldview. And they had the lowest aversion to actively meddling with nature. It's classic techno-optimism.
And what's the thinking there? I mean, what explains that unusual stance for a European nation?
It's all about their context, their huge reliance on the oil and gas industry. And because of that, massive state investment in technical fixes like carbon capture and storage, or CCS. When your state's economy relies on technical solutions, the public tends to see technological intervention as, well, natural and necessary.
Then we get to Italy, which, as you said earlier, is just a study in ambivalence. Italians express the strongest agreement that altering nature will be our downfall, a super cautious view. But at the same time, they were pretty positive about technology, agreeing that people who oppose tampering are naive.
That tension is fascinating, isn't it? It suggests a sort of philosophical resignation, like tampering is bad, but it might be necessary, maybe even inevitable, because the crisis is so urgent. It's not optimism, it's more like pragmatic resignation.
And shifting to personal experience, we see a much clearer link between being exposed to disasters and being worried about them. The UK had the highest share of respondents, 41%, who said they'd personally experienced a major natural disaster in the last 3 years.
And that high exposure level correlates directly with the UK's overall high level of worry about climate change. For them, it is not an abstract problem anymore, it's an immediate threat.
But Italy is still a puzzle here. Despite expressing high worry in general, only about 15.7% of Italians reported personal experience with a major natural disaster.
Yeah, the authors called that finding particularly puzzling, especially given how vulnerable Italy is to heat waves and floods. It makes you question if the high reported worry comes from the media or if it's more of a, abstract cultural concern that hasn't quite hit home on a personal level for many yet.
And conversely, you have Norwegians. They expressed a strong view that climate change mostly affects other countries and future generations, which lines up with their really low personal disaster experience, just 11.6%.
It's a powerful driver. When the crisis is seen as impacting them and happening later, the motivation for painful policy changes at home is lower, and accepting these high-tech, abstract fixes becomes a lot easier.
This brings us to what might be the most consequential section of this whole research project: governance and trust. Given the immense power and risk of these technologies, the debate shifts away from technical design and toward ethical management. Who should hold the keys to the planet?
And on this, the trust hierarchy was, without a doubt, the single most universal finding across all 5 countries. It followed this crystal clear 4-tier pattern.
Okay, so where did people place their trust?
The absolute highest trust was placed in universities and scientific institutes, in independent experts. They're seen as providing objective, non-political information.
And at the very bottom of the barrel.
National governments and politicians across the board. It's a really damning indictment of the political management of this crisis. Wow. Yeah. National political institutions are generally seen as too slow, too self-interested, or just too incompetent to manage something this big. Industry also got a pretty critical reception, especially in Austria and Germany, where people just did not trust profit-seeking motives at all.
So if the public trusts science but completely distrusts government, how does that actually translate into what they want to see happen?
It creates these really interesting divergences based on national models. In Germany, for instance, there was strong support for government coordination and regulation for novel CDR, like DACCS. They see DACCS as being like managing nuclear power. It's too important, too dangerous to be left to a single private company. It needs central state oversight.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about centralized control. But Norway, once again, they kind of buck that European trend of government distrust.
They do. Norway showed exceptionally high trust in their national government and also in the UN, which probably reflects their stable Nordic model of cooperation. As a result, Norwegians were the most supportive of having international bodies evaluate and assess SRM. If the UN signs off, Norway is likely to be on board.
And what about Italy, where government trust is low, but the perceived need for a technical solution is high?
Well, the default answer was often the government. But when urban participants were pressed, they said what they really wanted was an executive scientific committee. The rationale was that the experts have the knowledge and should be empowered to make the decisions so you can avoid government interests or corruption.
So when you look at overall policy support, what levers did the public actually want policymakers to pull?
The most supported options for both CDR and SRM were all focused on information and transparency. Things like educational campaigns and setting up international organizations to conduct oversight and set standards. That preference for external non-binding verification was especially high in Germany.
So in other words, people want to be informed, and they want an unbiased external referee. They don't want mandates, but they don't want a free-for-all either.
Precisely. And the least preferred options across the board were outright bans or moratoria, which is interesting because it suggests that even in highly skeptical places like Austria, people recognize these tools might be necessary. And for CDR, a global market for trading carbon credits was highly disliked, which just reinforces that deep distrust of the private sector profiting from a planetary crisis.
What about the public's own role in all this? I mean, do people actually want a seat at the table for something so complex?
The focus groups revealed this interesting ambivalence. In places like Italy, some participants basically said they felt overwhelmed and that they shouldn't be involved at all. They wanted to defer to the experts. One person said, each one of us has their own area of expertise, and this isn't theirs.
That's a fascinating insight. It's like the perceived burden of technical democracy.
But, and this is a critical distinction, that desire to defer should not be mistaken for desire to be ignored. There was a strong consensus on the need for the public to be informed and consulted in accessible ways. They want clarity on the risks and benefits, even if they don't want to design the machine themselves.
This study provides just an absolutely critical insight into the complex social landscape these technologies have to navigate. We've established that the public's lack of familiarity is widespread, but where opinions do exist, they are so highly contextual, shaped by national history, trust, and identity.
Which leads to a really critical policy implication. Governance just cannot be centralized solely in the hands of distrusted national governments or profit-seeking companies. It won't work. To get the legitimacy you need for deployment, policy has to leverage those highly trusted scientific institutions, the universities, the expert bodies, as the primary communication bridges and as the sources of oversight.
So relying on experts to set the standards and provide unbiased information is the absolute prerequisite for social license. Otherwise, that mitigation deterrent sphere and the aversion to tampering will just paralyze any action.
It's the only way to build trust where it is so clearly missing right now.
Okay, here is where the source material gets truly analytical as we wrap up. We've spent this entire deep dive comparing the fascinating differences between the 5 countries. The high worry in the UK versus the techno-optimism in Norway. But the research revealed a deeper, more profound duality.
And that duality is that the variation across people within a single country was actually found to be much larger than the variation between the national averages.
So let me make sure I get that right. The difference in opinion between the most skeptical Austrian and the most supportive Austrian is greater than the difference between the average Austrian and the average Norwegian. The internal split is massive.
That's it. That finding suggests these deep internal fractures within national populations about how to even approach climate intervention.
And this raises a provocative thought for you to mull over on your own. Does this huge internal variation suggest the potential for deep, paralyzing political polarization on climate issues within each nation? Or, conversely, does it signal a stronger possibility for achieving a regional consensus at the broader European level if expert guidance is centralized and highly trusted, thereby unifying these diverse internal factions under a shared scientific legitimacy?
That question is really going to define the political future of climate intervention.
Indeed, we've certainly extracted a complex picture from these sources. That's a wrap on this deep dive.